Hey crew, it's Pitt and I'm back with some more esoterica. Today we're diving back into the works of Mr. Carl Jung. This is Mysterium Coniunctionis. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but people do find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material, the link for my book, and the link to get in contact with me directly so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. In addition to that, if you find value in this study, I would appreciate it if you would hit all of the buttons down below. Give me a like, a share, a follow. Throw me a comment if you agree or disagree with anything that is stated. Put it in the box, and if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. In addition to that, if you truly find value, I would appreciate it if you would hit the hype button, which is a new thing you get to use once every three times a week so that you can help the smaller channels to get the recognition. It would be greatly appreciated if you find value, if you spend your hype on me. With that being said, we are going to continue our exploration of the Mysterium Coniunctionis with part 3 of the poem. There was an awkward stop yesterday. We did not find a natural, or in the last video, we did not find a natural place to stop, so we're going to be picking up in a kind of awkward place as well. If you are confused by anything that unfolds, fall back to the last video. Alright. According to the statement of the alchemist, the king changes into his animal attribute. That is to say, he returns to his animal nature, the psychic source of renewal. Weiland made use of this psychologium in his fairy tale, Der Sting der Wesen, footnote 163. Footnote 163 is a reference to that book, in which the dissipated King Mark is changed into an ass, though of course the conscious model for this was the transformation of Lucius into a golden ass in Apuleius. 164. As in Apuleius, the ass regains his human shape by eating roses. So he does here by eating a lily. In the Paris Magic Papyrus, the ass is the solar emblem of the 5th hour. Hoagland ranks the lion with the dog. Footnote 165. Also with the griffin, camel, horse, and calf. That is a wide variety of things. The lion has indeed something of the nature of the rabid dog we met with earlier, and this brings him into proximity with sulfur, the fiery dynamism of soul. There is nothing rabid in the behavior of a lion. It is perfectly understandable by his position in the ecology. If you meet a rabid lion, there is normally something wrong in the exact same way that there is something wrong with a rabid dog. In the same way, the lion is the potency of King Soul. 166. That is from Dorn's. The aggressive strength of the lion has, like sulfur, an evil aspect. In Honorius of Autun, the lion is an allegory of Antichrist and the devil. 167. That is not going to be a good allegory. Sermo in Dominica in Palmas. The devil is so-called dragon and lion. It is vitally important to note, right? I am not a Christian. That is important to note, but that is not what I'm noting. It is very important to note in this particular context that Jesus is known as the Lion of Judah. The allegory of the Antichrist and the devil is, of course, the lion, the Lion of Judah, in accordance with 1 Peter 5:8. Your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour. It is also important to note that there is no entity co-equal to the Creator, and so the devil is a concept. It is anthropomorphizing the forces of evil. At best, there might be an entity that identifies himself as Lucifer or even the devil, but that entity is not co-equal to God, never has been co-equal to God, was never able to go and converse with God. All of those things are simply things that we put upon that. But insofar as the lion and lioness are forerunners of the incestuous conjunctio, they come into the category of those theomorphic pairs who spend their time fighting and copulating. An example, the cock and hen, the two serpents of the caduceus, the two dragons, etc. The lion has, among other things, an unmistakable erotic aspect. Thus, the introitus apertus says, "Learn what the doves of Diana are, and conquer the lion with caresses. The green lion, I say, who, in truth, is the Babylonian dragon, who kills all with his venom. Learn, lastly, what the caduceus of Mercury is, wherewith he works miracles, and what are those nymphs whom he holds enchanted, if thou wouldst fulfill thy wish." An example, the completion of the work. Footnote 169. From the Musemica Hermeticus. This word, si voto tu corpus potri, might mean rather more than this, since votum also means vow. This is in accordance with what we have discussed many times before, right? We talked about the doves. The doves are the representative of the as above and the as below. In this context, even, right? Especially the doves of Diana, specifically the winged and the wingless, or the feathered and the featherless, who conquered the lion with caresses. Now, the lion, the green lion, is going to be the heart. That is the philosopher's stone. That is quite literally where you bind together the as above and the as below, which is Mercury, Mercurius, right? Not Mercury as the representative of the soul, which is a better representative, but Mercurius as the entity which contains both light and dark, masculine and feminine, from the beginning of this. And so that is all true to me, right? Even up to and including the Babylonian dragon, who kills all with his venom. If you are not correctly aligned, your heart does indeed emit venom, and wherewith he works miracles. That is exactly why I wrote this book. And what are those nymphs which he holds enchanted? For me, this understanding is going to be the nymphs as these chakras. If thou wouldst fulfill thy wish, the completion of the work. All of that is in accordance with what I already believe, confirmation bias acknowledged, but exactly what I would expect. The reference to the Babylonian dragon are not altogether accidental, since in ecclesiastical language, Babylon is thoroughly ambiguous. Kind of, right, there is the ambiguity of Babylon. That is, the whore of Babylon is the epitome of all that is wrong in the world. It is quite literally the overtaking of the temptations of the flesh, the giving in to the as below. That is what the whore of Babylon in the book of Revelation does represent. Babylon, as a concept, represents the same things. That is why Christianity is opposed to Babylon. But there was a city that was quite literally Babylon. And it was in Iraq, where the Tigris and the Euphrates meet. That is quite probably the source for the entirety of the Old Testament. There is no real reason to believe that the Old Testament was existent prior to the return from the exile from Babylon. It is entirely probable that the Old Testament was concocted to give the people who lived in this area a tie back to commonality that is a much more acceptable than the literal interpretation. I'm not standing firm on any of that, right? The Bible as an allegory works. The Bible as literal truth does not. And so, to me, that is arbitrary. But in this context, Babylon can mean either the literal city and kingdom. That, by the way, is the return, right? The Antichrist and all of that is associated directly with the Babylonian Empire, which now is the Muslims, right? I have done a video in the Revelation study where we discussed that quite extensively, down to where Gog and Magog is, down to where the return of all of these things is going to come from. If you are interested, it is available. Back to the text. Nicholas Flamel likewise alludes to Babylon when he says that the stink and poisonous breath of the burning mercury are nothing other than the dragon's head, which goes forth with great haste from Babylon, which is surrounded by 2 or 3 milestones. 171. Presumably 2 or 3 miles from the city. In the lion hunt of Marcos, 172, mentioned in the Arabic text as Marcus, king of Egypt. In the lion hunt of Marcos, the lion, as we have seen, takes the place of the king. Marcos prepares a trap in the lion, attracted by the sweet smell of a stone that is obviously an eye charm. 173. The stone which he who knows places on his eyes. That is completely different. Falls into it and is swallowed by the magic stone. And this stone, which the lion loves, is a woman. 174. That is Latin. The trap was covered by a glass roof, and the interior, called by Senior the cucurbita, is here called the thalamus, bridal chamber. It is important to note that we have a hypothalamus. The lion, therefore, falls like a bridegroom into the bridal chamber, where the magic stone that is good for the eyes and is a woman lies on the bed of coals. The bed of coals can be a representative for the void. The woman is the representative for the void. The lion falling like a bridegroom into the bridal chamber would be the penetration of the light into the void, in my understanding. This stone swallows the lion, so that nothing more of him was to be seen. This is a parallel of the Aristotelis vision, where Bea causing Abracus to disappear into her body. In the lion hunt, the incest, though veiled, is clear enough. The love affair is projected on the lion, the animal nature or acquiescent soul of the king. In other words, it is enacted in his unconscious or in a dream. Because of his ambiguous character, the lion is well suited to take over the role of this indecorous lover. As the king is represented by his animal and his mother by the magic stone, the royal incest can take place as though it were happening somewhere outside, in quite another sphere than the personal world of the king and his mother. Indeed, the marriage not only seems to be unnatural, but is actually intended to be so. The tabooed incest is imposed as a task, and, as the wealth of allegory shows, it is always in some symbolical form and never concrete. One has the impression that this sacral act, this sacral act, yeah, that's where we attribute it, of whose incestuous nature the alchemists were by no means unconscious, was not so much banished by them into the cucurbita or glass house, but was taken at all in the time. Whoever wished to commit this act in its true sense would therefore have to get outside himself, as if into external glass house, around cucurbita, which represented the microcosmic space of the psyche. A little reason would teach us that we do not need to get outside ourselves, but merely a little deeper into ourselves to experience the reality of incest and much else besides, since in each of us slumbers the beast-like primitive who may be roused by the doves of Diana. That has nothing to do with incest. This would account for the widespread suspicion that nothing good can come out of the psyche. Undoubtedly, the hierogamos of the substances is a projection of the unconscious contents. These constants, it is usually concluded, therefore belong to the psyche and, like the psyche itself, are inside man. Q.E.D. As against this, the fact remains that only a very few people are, or ever were, conscious of having any incestuous fantasies worth mentioning. If such fantasies are present at all, they are not yet conscious like the collective unconscious in general. An analysis of dreams and other products of the unconscious is needed to make these fantasies visible. To what end the considerable resistances have to be overcome, as though one were entering a strange territory, a region of the psyche to which one feels no longer related, let alone identical with it. And whoever has strayed into that territory, either out of negligence or by mistake, feels outside himself and a stranger in his own house. I think one should take cognizance of these facts and not attribute to our personal psyche everything that appears as a psychic content. After all, we would not do this with a bird that happened to fly through our field of vision. It may well be a prejudice to restrict the psyche to being inside the body. Insofar as the psyche has a non-spatial aspect, there may be a psychic outside the body, a region so utterly different from my psychic space that one has to get outside oneself or make use of some auxiliary technique in order to get there. If this view is at all correct, the alchemical consummation of the royal marriage in the concubita could be understood as a synthetic process in the psyche outside the ego. Footnote 175 is from My Synchronicity and a Causal Connecting Principle. As I have said, the fact that one can get into this territory somehow or another does not mean that it belongs to me personally. The ego is here and now, but the outside of the ego is an alien there, both earlier and later, before and after. Footnote 176. Considering, that is to say, that time is cyclically relative, as the ESP experiments have shown, see the writings of J.B. Rhine. So it is not surprising that the primitive mind senses the psyche outside the ego as an alien country, inhabited by the spirits of the dead. On a rather higher level, it takes on the character of a shadowy semi-reality. And on the level of the ancient cultures, the shadows of that land beyond have turned into ideas. In Gnostic Christian circles, these were developed into a dogmatic, hierarchically arranged cosmogonic and Kilialistic system, which appears to us moderns as an involuntary symbolic statement of the psyche concerning the structure of the psychic non-ego. 177. I am aware of the problematical nature of this conception, but those who know the material will admit that it is no easy task to express this subtle but very important difference in conceptual terms. In actual practice, the difference is immediately apparent, since, compared with personal contents, the products of the non-ego often have the quite specific character of revelation, and are therefore felt as being inspired by an alien presence, or as perceptions of an object independent of the ego. Archetypical experiences often have a numinous effect, and for that reason are of the greatest importance in psychotherapy. This region, and all of this is dealing with internal self-reflection. I am not in opposition to it, so I'm just kind of blowing through it faster than I normally would. I'm trying not to interrupt as much. There's no reason for me to disagree with the fact that you need to do internal reflection. Now, all of this definite defining of the internal and all of that, that's whatever. This region, if still seen as a spectral land beyond, appears to be a whole world in itself, a macrocosm. If, on the other hand, it is felt as psychic and inside, it seems like a microcosm of the smallest proportions, on a par with the race of dwarfs in the casket described in Goethe's poem. The New Mulicine, or like the interior of the concubita, in which the alchemist beheld the creation of the world, the marriage of the royal pair, and the homunculus. 178. As the discussion started with the concept of Leo, I would like to draw the reader's attention to Bruno Goetz's novel, Das Reich in Rom. Goetz gives an excellent description of that feverish atmosphere, which ends with the sorcerer shrinking down a pair of lovers and putting them in a glass vial. This erotic fever seems to be connected with Leo, for a passage in the Lion Hunt runs. His mother said to him, O Marcos, must this fire be lighter than the heat of fever? And Marcos said to her, O mother, let it be in the state of fever. I return and enkindle that fire. The fire in the pit that serves Leo as a bridal bed. I don't know that any of those are actually relevant, right? I've not done the research into the actual literature that is being spoken upon, so I'm just going to roll with it. Just as in alchemical philosophy, the anthroparion, or homunculus, corresponds as the lapis to the anthropos, so the chemical wedding have their dogmatic parallels in the marriage of the Lamb, the union of sponsus and sponsa, and the hieros gasmos of the mother of the gods and the Son. This apparent digression from our theme seemed to me necessary in order to give the reader some insight into the intricate and delicate nature of the lion symbol, whose further implications we must now proceed to discuss. The blood of the green lion drunk by the queen is handed to her in a golden cup of Babylon. This refers to the great whore in Revelation 17, that sitteth upon many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication, having a golden cup in her hand full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. That is entirely possible. The whore, I have done an entire study on the whore of Babylon. It is part of the Revelation thing, and it is something to look at for sure. The whore is a well-known figure in alchemy. She characterizes the arcane substance in its initial, chaotic, maternal state. I would not refer to the void as a whore, but that's me. The Introitus Apertus says that the chaos is like a mother of the metals. It is also called Aur Luna, before the royal diadem is extracted from the menstruum of a whore. Footnote 179. 179 is from Museum Hermetica by Arthur White. An example, before the king is reborn for the moon mother. The Tractus Aureus de Lapide says of the arcane substance, that noble whore Venus, footnote 180, in Abul Qasim, Venus is nicknamed, the noble, the impure, the green lion, the father of colors, the peacock of Pleiades, and the phoenix. Noble and impure do not go together. The noble whore Venus is clothed and enveloped in abounding color. This color has a reddish appearance. Footnote 181. From the Hermetica. The nobility of this Venus derives from the fact that she is also the queen, the chaste bride of the king. Footnote 182. The contradiction between meretrix and sponsa is of very ancient origin. Ishtar, the beloved of the Song of Songs, yes, is on one hand the harlot of the gods, the hierodule of heaven, but on the other hand she is the mother and virgin. No. Unperturbed by the identity of the arcane substance with Venus, which he himself asserts, Kunrath calls the mother of the Lapis a virgin and a generato casta, chaste generation. Or again, he speaks of the virgin womb of chaos, inspired less by Christian tradition than by the insistence of the archetype, which had already prompted the same statements about Ishtar. Mother, daughter, sister, bride, matron, and whore are always combined in the anima archetype by patristic interests. It is important to note that all of these things were, in fact, from the patriarchal society. These societies had a tendency to hold back their maternals, right? The feminine aspects were not revered in the correct way, and revered is the wrong word, and so it is indeed a combination of mother and whore to a guy who has no respect. In his Practica de Lapide, Basilius Valentinus says, this tincture is the rose. Footnote concerning the rose, seeing the other paragraphs. The tincture is the rose of Amastas, of Tyrian hue, called also the red blood of the dragon, described by many as the purple cloak. 184. The richness of Venus's colors is also praised by Basilius Valentinus in his treatise on the 7 planets. We will not be back till 189. Then the purple cloak with which the queen is covered. A variant says, that precious substance is the Venus of the ancients, the hermaphrodite, who has 2 sexes. Meyer writes, in our chemistry there is Venus and Cupid, for Psyche is the female, Cupid the male. Do not disagree. Who is held to be the dragon. The opus ad rubum, reddening, takes place in the 2nd house of Venus, Libra. Accordingly, the Turbo remarks that Venus precedes the Sun. Footnote 189. Venus, however, precedes the Sun since she is Eastern. It is important to note that there is the Eastern star, right? The Eastern star is Venus. It appears for roughly half the year in the morning, right? Before the sun rises, you can find Venus in the east. It also appears in half the year in the evening. It is also the evening star. It appears in the west right before the sun sets, or right after the sun sets. It is the same thing seen half here, half there, and the transition point is not always apparent. And so, in part, Venus does indeed precede the sun, since she is eastern, but she is also western and therefore follows the sun. Flamel takes Venus as an important component of the arcane substance. In an apostrophe to the Magnesia, he says, "Thou bearest within thee the many-formed image of Venus, the cupbearer, and the fire-spitting serpent." Remember that the water is the allegory for the fire, right? I know that seems contradictory, but there are reasons. Footnote 190. The Magnesia is also called Afroselenium Orientis, the moonstone of the East. The latter referring to the sulfurous aspect of Mercurius. Agreed. Mercurius also plays the role of cupbearer in the Cantilena. In Flamel, the Lapis is born of the conjunction of the Venus Pugnax, fighting Venus. Footnote 191. Her classical cognomen is Armata. According to Pernity, Venus is bound to Mars by a fire, which is of the same nature as the sun, the bull slaying Venus with the sword in Lajard. And Mercurius, evidently a reference to the quarreling that precedes their union. There is a quarreling, right? We have talked before about how Mercurius is the aspect of the divine, right? Containing both the masculine and the feminine in equal measure. It is the representative of both. But there is a quarreling that happens between the light and the dark. In Valentinius's poem on the prima materia lapidus, Venus is identified with the fountain, the mother and bride of the king, in which her fixed father is drowned. A nature there is, and yet no stone. In it doth nature work alone. For from it there welleth forth a fount, in which her sire, the fixed, is drowned, her body and life absorbed therein, until the soul's restored again. That is the process, right? Maybe not as described exactly as I would, but well enough to be identified. 192, that is from Chemistry Stripton. In other texts, Venus represents the queen at the wedding, as in Introitus Apertus. See to it that you prepare the couch of Venus carefully, then lay her on the marriage bed, etc. Footnote 193. The text continues, and in the fire you will see an emblem of the great work, black, the peacock's tail, white, yellow, and red, from the Hermetica. In general, Venus appears as the feminine aspect of the king, or, as we should say, his anima. Thus Valentinus says of Adam and Venus in the bath, "So saith the wise men, naught they be, except the double Mercury." Agreed. The king in the bath and the connubium with Venus, 194. 194 is obscenely described in Figulus. The connubium with Venus or with the mother are the same thing. The man encompasses by the woman. Sometimes he and sometimes she is hermaphroditic. 195. The androgynous Venus is a very ancient prototype. French, likewise, the research the cult of Venus. Because at the bottom they are nothing other than the Mercurius duplex, and that I agree with, right? We have talked extensively about that. There were whole sections devoted to that. Venus or the whore corresponds to the erotic aspect of the lion, who is in turn is an attribute of the king. As in the Apocalypse, the seven-headed dragon is riding the animal of the great whore. There are reasons for that particular allegory. So in Valentinius, the lion is the mount of Mercurius duplex, portrayed in his feminine aspect. 196. We have not gone back to do a study with the new knowledge. I'm not sure if we will, but if we did, this seven-headed dragon probably stands for something else. Kunrath equates Venus with the green lion. Footnote 197. Oh wait, we'll be back at 198. Since sulfur is to soul as Leo is to Rex, we can see why Kunrath regards Venus as the anima vegetativa of sulfur. 198. Ibid. Other synonyms are Sol Veneris, Vitrolium Veneris, Sal Saturni, Leo Rubus et Vidris, Sulfur Vitroli, since they are all the scintilla anima mundi, the active principle that manifests itself into powerful instincts. We will be back at 205. The most subtle substance must, when mixed with soul, be preserved in a bottle whose stopper is marked with the sign of the cross, just as an evil spirit is banished by a crucifix. That is dependent upon faith and not the tool. The relation of the stone to Venus occurs as early as the Greek texts, which speak of the Cytherian stone and the pearl of Cytherea. In the Arabic Book of Crates, Venus is endowed with tincturing power. She is therefore called a scribe. Since she holds the vessel from which quicksilver continually flows, the word Acrivian very probably refers to Tehote Mercurius. In the vision of Crates, Venus appears surrounded by a number of Indians who shoot arrows at him. This image occurs again in Senior's vision of Hermes Trismegistus, at whom 9 eagles shot their arrows. Mercurius is the archer, who, chemically, dissolves the gold and, morally, pierces the soul with the dart of passion. As Kalenios, he is identical with Cupid, who likewise shoots arrows in Rosencreutz's chemical wedding. The corrupt nature of Venus is stressed in Rosinis ad Sarantanatam, and mark that nature in the beginning of her origin and tend to make the sun and moon, but cannot, because of Venus, who is a corrupt and mixed quicksilver, or because of the fetid earth. Wherefore, as a child in its mother's womb accidentally contracts a weakness and a corruption by reason of the place, although the sperm was clean, and the child is nevertheless leprous and unclean because of the corrupt womb. So it is with all imperfect metals which are corrupted by Venus and the fetid earth. Lastly, I would mention the king's daughter in the play In the Chemical Wedding, who was chosen as the bride, but because of her coquetry was made captive by the king of the Moors. She agrees to be his concubine and thus proves herself a regular meretrix. Rosencreutz's visit to the sleeping Venus shows that this two-faced goddess is somehow secretly connected with the opus. 205. This also suggests by the mysterious passage in Dorn, "Seek your lion in the east, and the eagle to the south, in taking up this work of ours. You should direct your way to the south, so shall you obtain your desire in Cyprus, of which nothing more may be said." For the alchemist, Cyprus is definitely associated with Venus. In this connection, I would also refer to Dorn's commentary on the Vita Longa of Paracelsus, discussed in my Paracelsus as a Spiritual Phenomenon. It is concerned with the characteristics of Venus in Paracelsus, which Dorn interprets as the shield and buckler of love. Evidently, on account of its close connection with Venus, the green lion has, surprisingly enough, rose-colored blood, as mentioned by Dorn and his contemporary Kunrath, 206 and 207. 206. The idea of the rose-colored blood seems to go back to Paracelsus. Therefore I say to you, saith Paracelsus. And 207 is a reference to another book. The latter ascribes rose-colored blood to the Filius Macrocosmi as well. Footnote 208. On page 276, he speaks of the rose-colored blood and ethereal water that flowed from the side of the sun of the great world. This peculiarity of the green lion's blood establishes its connection not only with the Filius, a well-known Christ parallel, but above all with the rose, whose symbolism produced not only the popular title Rosarium, rose garden, but also the Rosenkreuz, rosy cross, the white and the red rose. Footnote 209. Figulus says, I will not forbear to admonish thee not to reveal to anyone, however dear, the treasure of our secrets, lest the stinking goats browse upon the red and white roses of our rose garden. The white and red rose are synonyms for the albedo and rubido. Footnote 210. The white rose is completed in summertime in the east. The tincture is of a rosy color and corresponds to the blood of Christ, who is compared and united with the stone. Footnote 211. That is from another book. We are going to come back at 213. He is the heavenly foundation stone and cornerstone. The rose garden is a garden enclosed, and like the rose is sobriquets of Mary, the parallel of the locked primal materia. 213. Gloria Mundi. How the garden is to be opened, and the noble roses are to be seen in their field. I am going to go ahead and point out that this is most likely an allegory for the internal work, the internal garden that you use, the rubido and albedo of the process of refination, the red at the beginning, the white at the end. All of these things are perfectly understandable, even if not properly described, by the things that I talk about on a regular basis. I am not extrapolating upon them because I'm trying to kind of blow through this. There's a lot of this that is simply irrelevant and it doesn't need explanation. The relation of the love goddess to red dates back to ancient times. 214. Red is indeed the color of love, but it is also the color of wrath. I wonder if that's related. Cf. Rosy Pantheon, rose-hued Aphrodite, rose-hued Cyprian. It is not, however, the color of lust. Scarlet, 215, that is just the word, is the color of the great whore of Babylon and her beast. Red is the color of sin. It is the color of one of them. 216, Isaiah 1:8. Though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. Though they be red like crimson, they shall be as wool. There is an allegory that could be taken from that. The rose is also an attribute of Dionysus. Red and rose red are the color of blood, a synonym for the aqua permanens and the soul, which are extracted from the prima materia and bring dead bodies back to life. 217. In keeping with these associations, the adulterous queen in Weiland's alchemical fairy tale was changed into a pink goat. The prima materia is called Meretrix and is equated with the Great Babylon, just as are the dragon and the lion with the dragon of Babel. The stone, Filius Regius, is the son of this whore. In ecclesiastical tradition, the son of the whore is Antichrist, begotten by the devil, as we read in the Elucidarium of Honorius of a tomb. Footnote 218. Antichrist shall be born in Great Babylon, of a whore of the tribe of Dan. He will be filled with the devil in his mother's womb and brought up by witches in Chorazin. This is not far off, but it is off, right? This is taking things kind of out of context. Babylon is the center of Revelation. It is not Rome. If you were looking for the Antichrist from Rome or any of the Eastern countries, you did not pay attention to the source material at all. It is quite explicit in that material that the ones who rule Babylon will be the ones in the end, right? According to the prophecies that are given. That is the Muslims these days, right? I know that is maybe not the correct way to refer to them, but I don't care. I went into it in extensive detail in other places, but there have been 7 possessors of Babylon up to and including today, which means that the beginning of the news cycle is imminent, right? But the people who are in charge of it now are the exact same people that were in charge of it then. The only possibility of that possession being broken was Alexander the Great, who defeated Babylon, right? Took possession of the city and then immediately died. It was within 4 days that he died. He was not the ruler of Babylon. it reverted almost immediately back to other rule, and that other rule was a continuation of the previous rule. And so it has been fairly uninterrupted through 7 iterations. And again, we talk about that quite extensively in Revelation. And so the Antichrist shall be born in Great Babylon, not necessarily from the tribe of Dan, although it would not surprise me in the slightest if there was actual Jewish relations to the Antichrist because of what is expected from him. Filled with the devil in his mother's womb and brought up the witches in Chorazin. However, all of that is just simply adding things in, the self-insertion that we see in so many places. There is no reason to believe that there is a devil, much less that it possessed someone in their mother's womb. Back to the text. Certain of the ecclesiastical symbols prove to be acutely dualistic, and this is also true of the rose. Above all is an allegory of Mary and of various virtues. Its perfume is the odor of sanctity, as in the case of Saint Elizabeth and Saint Teresa. At the same time, it symbolizes human beauty, Venustas, indeed, the lust of the world, voluptuous mundi. Footnote 219. Like to the rose that blooms in the midst of the thorns that enclose it, so are the pleasures of love, never unshared with its gall. Like the rose, the figure of the Mother Beloved shines in all the hues of heavenly and earthly love. She is the chaste bride and whore who symbolizes the primal material which nature left imperfected. It is clear from the material we have cited that this refers to the anima. She is that piece of chaos which is everywhere and yet hidden. She is that vessel of contradictions and many colors. A totality in the form of a massa confusa, yet a substance endowed with every quality in which the splendor of the hidden deity can be revealed. The food of the Queen Mother, peacock's flesh and lion's blood, consists of the goddess's own attributes, that is to say, she eats and drinks herself. The Concilium Coniunctionis formulates this as follows. And so at length it sinks down into one content through saturation with the same ferment, water, for water is the ferment of water. 220. That is from the Consiglii, what you already said. It is always the same idea which is expressed by the Ouroboros. Unexpectedly, but not surprisingly, we come across a similar formulation in ecclesiastical literature in the remark of St. John Chrysostom that Christ was the first to eat his own flesh and drink his own blood. At the institution of the Last Supper, 221. That is a reference to something else. Tertullian says, in the same way the Lord applied to himself 2 Greek letters, the first and the last, as figures of the beginning and the end, which are united in himself. For just as Alpha continues on until it reaches Omega, and Omega completes the cycle back again to Alpha, so he meant to show that in him is found the course of all things from the beginning to the end, and from the end back to the beginning, so that every divine dispensation should end in him, through whom it began. 222. Treatises on marriage and remarriage. Interesting. The reference coming from there is interesting. Not necessarily what was said, right? I do not believe that Christ was the Alpha and Omega. That would be the Logos at best, and the Logos was not Christ. This thought corresponds exactly to what the alchemists sought to express by the Ouroboros. Yes, if you take out Christ. The Ouroboros is a very ancient pagan symbol, and we have no reason to suppose that the idea of self-generating and self-devouring being was borrowed from Christianity. We have every reason to believe that it was not. E.g., from Tertullian, although the analogy with Christ, who as the one God begets himself and voluntarily offers himself for sacrifice, and then in the rite of the Eucharist, through the words of the consecration, performs his own immolation, is very striking. The concept of the Ouroboros must be older and may ultimately go back to ancient Egyptian theology, to the doctrine of homusia, of the Father God, with the divine son, Pharaoh. It also has roots in India. You should check it out. It has roots in North America. You should check that out as well. In the Cantilena, the mythologem of the Ouroboros is unexpectedly and most unusually translated into feminine form. It is not the father and son who merge into one another, but the mother who merges with her own substance, eating her own tail or impregnating herself, as the king in the Allegorica Merlini drank his own water. 223. This pun is permissible since one of the synonyms for the aqua permanens is urina priorum. So, urine? The queen is a condition of psychic pregnancy. The anima has become activated and sends her contents into consciousness. This corresponds to the peacock's flesh and lion's blood. If the products of the anima, dreams, fantasies, visions, symptoms, chance ideas, etc., are assimilated, digested, and integrated, this has a beneficial effect on the growth and development, nourishment of the psyche. At the same time, the sabatio and imbiptio of the anima mother indicate the integration and completion of the entire personality. The anima becomes creative when the old king renews himself in her. Psychologically, the king stands first of all for soul, whom we have interpreted as consciousness, but over and above that, he represents a dominant of consciousness, just as a generally accepted principle or collective conviction or a traditional view. These systems and ruling ideas age and thereby forcibly bring about a metamorphosis of the gods, as described in Spittler's Olympian Spring. It seldom occurs as a definitive collective phenomenon. Mostly it is a change in the individual which may, under certain conditions, affect society when the time is fulfilled. In the individual, it only means that the ruling idea is in need of renewal and alteration if it is to deal adequately with the changed outer or inner conditions. The fact that the king played a large role in medieval alchemy for several hundred years proves that. From about the 13th century onwards, the traces of the king's renewal, surviving from Egyptian and Hellenistic times, began to gain in importance because they had acquired a new meaning. For as the West started to investigate nature, till then completely unknown, the doctrine of the Lumen Naturae began to germinate too. Ecclesiastical doctrine and scholastic philosophy had both proved incapable of shedding any light on the nature of the physical world. The conjecture thereupon arose that just as the mind revealed its nature in the light of divine revelation, so nature herself must possess a sudden luminosity which could become a source of enlightenment. It is therefore understandable that for those individuals whose particular interest lay in the investigation of natural things, the dogmatic view of the world should lose its force as the Lumen Naturae gained attraction, even though the dogma itself was not directly doubted. The more serious alchemists, if we are to believe their statements, were religious people who had no thought of criticizing revealed truth, because they were smart people who knew that they would die. And you can, like I could, couch my language in Christ. I don't, because it is not necessary. If you choose to kill me because I stand for God and not Christ, then that is God's will and okay. Back then, that was not the same thing. There was very real dangers. If you were to couch that the divine did not need an intermediary for redemption, that would be a big deal. They would pull you apart with horses or put you in an apparatus to create extreme torture for you. And so, that is why they used the religious terminology, more than likely. There is in the literature of alchemy, so far as I can judge, no attack on dogma, for the reasons that I just described, right? Dorn had no understanding of Christ as it is given, right? He has the understanding that I talk about in this book. The same has been true for several of these references, but they couch their language in the language of the current times so that they do not wind up tortured and dead. The only thing of this kind is a deprecation of the Aristotelian philosophy sponsored by the Church in favor of Hermetic Neoplatonism. 224. Dorn writes, Whoever wishes to learn the alchemical art, let him learn not the philosophy of Aristotle, but that which teaches the truth, for his teaching consists entirely in amphibiology, which is the best of all cloaks for lies. When he censured Plato and others for the sake of gaining renown, he could find no more commodious instrument than that which he used for his censure, namely amphibiology, attacking his writings on the one hand, defending them by subterfuge on the other, and the reverse. And this kind of sophistry is to be found in all of his writings. That is an attack upon him indeed. Not only were the old masters not critical of ecclesiastical doctrine, they were, on the contrary, convinced that their discoveries, real or imaginary, would enrich the doctrine of the correspondence of heavenly and earthly things, since they endeavored to prove that the mystery of faith was reflected in the world of nature. For the alchemist, the world was an image and symbol of God. For me, it is as well. But that has nothing to do with Christ or the ecclesiastical language. I absolutely equate every single thing in existence with God. Not that it is God, but that it is a representative of God. They could not guess that their passion for investigating nature would detract as much as it did from revealed truth, and that their scientific interest could be aroused only as the fascination of dogma began to pall. And so, as in dreams, they grew up in their unconscious the compensating image of the king's renewal. These considerations make it more comprehensible that it was a cleric who wrote the Cantilena. It is indeed something of a descent to the underworld when he makes Mercurius bearing the dot of passion, the emblem of Cupid. 226. Mercurius is also an archer. Hand the queen the blood potion and a golden cup of Babylon. This, as we have seen, is the golden cup, full of the abomination and filthiness of fornication. And it is quite obvious that she is being ruthlessly regaled with her own psychic substances. These are animal substances she has to integrate. The accrescent soul, peacock and lion with their positive and negative qualities, and the draught is given to her in the cup of fornication, which emphasizes still more the erotic nature of the lion, his lust and greed. Such an integration amounts to a widening of consciousness through profound insight. But why should such an unpalatable diet be prescribed for the queen? Obviously because the old king lacked something on which account he grew senile, the dark, chthonic aspect of nature. And not only this, but the sense that all creation was in the image of God, the antique feeling for nature, which in the Middle Ages was considered a false track and an aberration. Dark and unfathomable as the earth is, its theriomorphic symbols do not have only a reductive meaning, but one that is prospective and spiritual. They are paradoxical, pointing upwards and downwards at the same time. If contents like these are integrated in the queen, it means that her consciousness is widened in both directions. This diet will naturally benefit the regeneration of the king by supplying what was lacking before. Contrary to appearances, this is not only the darkness of the animal sphere, but rather a spiritual nature or a natural spirit, which even has its analogies with the mystery of faith, as the alchemists were never tired of emphasizing. During her pregnancy, therefore, the queen, and I don't disagree with that, right? We have talked extensively about that through this entire chapter. I'm trying not to hammer the same things over and over again, right? I did it extensively. During her pregnancy, therefore, the queen undergoes something akin to psychotherapeutic treatment, exploring the shadow, yes, whereby her consciousness is enriched by a knowledge of the collective unconscious, the shadow, and we may assume by her inner participation in the conflict between her spiritual and chthonic nature, as above, so below. Often, the law governing the progressive widening of consciousness makes the evaluation of the heights and depths into a moral task transcending the limits of convention. Failure to know what one is doing acts like guilt and must be paid for as dearly. The conflict may even turn out to be an advantage, since without it there could be no reconciliation and no birth of a supraordinate third thing. The king could then be neither renewed nor reborn. The conflict is manifested in the long sickness of the queen. And that is where we're going to go ahead and finish this one off for today. We will be back with verse 18 in the next video. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat difficult series of topics. I understand I hold some unconventional beliefs, and I do have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something I apologize for. Again, I don't have a whole lot to add here, right? I blew through this particular section because this entire last hour has been a reiteration of the previous 2 hours. And I could have made this another 2-hour video by stopping and pointing out all of the same things. If you are confused by me passing the things over, fall back to the last video, the very last one, the one before this one. We talked about all of the things that is described here in great detail. The 7 chakras, the balancing that is required between them, that is all explained here again. The light and dark forces, bringing them into union, is brought into light here again. And so I don't feel like I got a whole lot to add. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, a share, a follow, throw me a comment. Whether you agree or disagree with anything that was stated, put it in the box down below. And if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If you really like what I'm doing over here, hit me with that super thanks. Consider joining for a membership, picking up a copy of my book, reaching out and contacting me directly, or hitting that hype button. That one will do a lot for the channel if you could bring yourself to do it for me. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt's Take. Peace.